From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Sweeney Gray. The government of the Dominican Republic says everything is ready to receive the delegations from the Venezuelan government and opposition for what is hoped to be the signing of a political and economic agreement. The current round of talks between the two sides was suspended last Wednesday, with some differences over whether a pre-agreement had been reached. On Monday, one of the main mediators, the former Spanish Premier José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, visited the presidential palace in Caracas. The Dominican Foreign Ministry tweeted, "We have confirmation from both sides that early this afternoon negotiations between the Venezuelan government and opposition will begin here at our ministry." Our correspondent Freddie Gillingham has more from Caracas.
So we can confirm that the opposition and government dialogue in Santo Domingo will be resuming. It had been suspended from yesterday. We were all set and ready to receive the official presidential election date yesterday. The National Electoral Council were due to give that announcement. However, it had been delayed due to suspended dialogue in Santo Domingo. That will be resuming. We will now have to wait and see if and when they sign an agreement today. We don't really know, but as soon as they do sign an agreement, the CNE are set to give an official date for that presidential election. Let's just recap. On January 23rd, the presidential election of 2018 was brought forward to happen before the end of April. All eyes and ears have been on Santo Domingo since then, waiting for an agreement to be signed. We were at a press conference yesterday with Jorge Rodriguez, the communications minister. He did announce that the PSUV were very much ready to sign pen to paper on a coexistence agreement. We'll just have to wait and see what happens in Santo Domingo today. It's back to you in the studios for now.
Thank you, Freddie, for that report. The U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has met the president of Peru, Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, as part of a tour of Latin America and the Caribbean, focused on stepping up measures against the Venezuelan government. The two discussed preparations for the Summit of the Americas in Lima in April. Tillerson said President Donald Trump has not yet decided if he will attend the summit, but that this does not depend on whether the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, is present or not. On Monday, Tillerson met the Peruvian foreign minister, Cayetana Aljoven. Tillerson said their conversation centered around what their respective governments could do together to put pressure on Venezuela, as they believe the Venezuelan people's voices are not heard enough.
Both President Trump and President Kuczynski discussed when they were together last year, and that's the serious concerns we all share around the political situation in Venezuela. Our governments appreciate Peru's leadership of the Lima group in an effort to bring some reconciliation between the Maduro regime, encouraging the regime to return to its constitution and allow the people of Venezuela's voice to be heard in the selection of their leaders.
The Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, has responded to the U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's threat of oil sanctions against Venezuela. He said these would fail to harm the country's oil industry, adding that Tillerson's tour of Latin America has failed.
Rex Tillerson has failed, that's what I say. He failed in his tour through Latin America. He remained isolated. His own right-wingers have turned their back on him because he came with a group with extremist ideas. Nobody threatens Venezuela. If he wants to declare a US oil embargo against Venezuela, then Venezuela will overcome any threat and embargo, and we will continue selling oil to the world. And there are many people ready to buy our oil. We do not depend on the United States.
An arrest warrant in the United Kingdom against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange remains valid. The warrant was issued in 2012 after Assange breached bail conditions by seeking asylum in Ecuador's London embassy, where he has since remained. Lawyers for Assange had argued in court that the warrant had lost its purpose after Swedish authorities dropped their own extradition warrant against their client. But as a senior judge in London has ruled that not surrendering to bail is a standalone offence. Assange fled to the embassy after skipping bail to avoid being sent to Sweden to face sexual assault allegations. He feared extradition to the US over the publication of classified military and diplomatic documents. Swedish prosecutors eventually dropped their investigation, but British authorities said Assange still faced arrest for skipping bail, an offence which carries a maximum 1-year prison sentence. However, Assange himself has been tweeting his reaction to the ruling. He says the fight is far from over and the court will not issue a ruling on 3 other points until the 13th of February. And we'll take a short break now. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting on. Welcome back. The Brazilian president, Michel Temer, has announced that approving his proposal to reform the pension system is an urgent task. Trade unions and social movements are gathering in Brasilia to reject the reform. Our correspondent in Brasilia, Adriana Rabreño, has more.
Trade unions and social organizations have rejected the pension reform law imposed by President Michel Temer. Today, they are demonstrating outside the lower house. Social and political organizations there isn't a social security budget deficit, and therefore the government should not modify the current pension law. They also argue that under President Michel Temer's administration, there has been a huge political propaganda that costs around millions of dollars. The government is also using social media and TV networks to promote the pension reform law. This is outrageous since the government said there is no money for pensioners, and on the other hand, they spend millions of dollars on propaganda. The government proposed to extend the retirement age limit to 65 years old for men and women. However, after massive protests and demonstrations, the government had to take a step back on this decision, and now women will be able to retire at 62 years old. On February 19th, trade unions will prepare a massive demonstration to pressure lower house representatives to stop this reform. Unions and organizations will present today a document called the Brasilia Act, which rejects the political persecution against former President Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva and supports his presidential candidacy.
Que tenía el gobierno ha ido cambiando. Ahora las mujeres se jubilarán a los 60.
A Brazilian judge has given former President Lula da Silva back his passport. Last week, his passport was seized and he was prevented from leaving the country for a scheduled trip to Ethiopia. A judge ruled the former president was not planning to flee the country after he was sentenced to 12 years in prison over corruption charges. He also said Lula was invited by the Food and Agriculture United Nations Agency to take part in a summit and that he had communicated this beforehand. And in Dominica, they're battening down the hatches. The foreign minister has warned the nation that hurricane season is just 5 months away.
These extreme weather events are going to be the new normal. And it cannot be business as usual. We have to find creative ways of dealing with the situation that we're faced with now. I cannot say that we have identified at this point innovative ways of dealing with it. What we are embarking on is a process of consultation, wide consultation locally, and drawing on the experience of our international partners.
The nation is still trying to recover from Hurricanes Irma and Maria last year. So far, electricity has been restored to only 10% of the population. The cost of recovery stands at about $1.4 billion. That's 2.5 times its GDP. The Prime Minister has called on the international community to scale up investments to help build a climate change resilient country. Bolivia remains on alert as at least 17 municipalities have reported material losses due to persistent rains in recent weeks. Details from our correspondent in this report.
At least 5 municipalities have been declared disaster zones and another 12 are in a state of emergency after the damage caused by non-stop rains attributed to the climate phenomenon known as La Niña.
Across the country, 17 municipalities have been declared disaster areas or state of emergencies, largely within the departments of Potosí, Beni, Chuquisaca, Cochabamba, and Tarija. We've been monitoring the water levels in rivers, and according to meteorological reports, the rains will continue.
Meteorological services warn that bad weather will continue until March, and that emergency services should remain on maximum alert in order to provide immediate relief.
We are asking the communities of Chaco, Tarijeño, and Beni to stay on high alert and, if possible, to continue evacuating families threatened by the extreme weather.
The government has denounced the opposition of using this issue to spread lies and discredit the government through social media by using unrelated images from other countries. In one example, the opposition actually used footage of former President Rafael Correa's vehicle attack in Ecuador as if the incident had taken place in Tupiza against President Evo Morales.
This is one of many things that's circulating right now on social media, which takes advantage of the situation at a time when the country is being faced by climate disasters. But this isn't the only example. Supposedly this image depicts a rupture at Caiguá de Villamontes on January the 31st this year. The video has been circulating for a few days, but when we look closely, the video is actually a reservoir overflowing in Argentina.
The Defense Ministry's official report indicates that more than 7,000 families have been affected by the heavy rainfall and river overflow, with 145 houses destroyed. One person has also died within the last 2 weeks.
The governor of Puerto Rico, Ricardo Rosselló, announced some public schools will be privatized to implement a charter schools program. The voucher program, projected to begin between the 2019 to the 2020 school year, would allow parents to choose public or private school alternatives. Governor Ricardo Rosselló also said that every public school teacher in Puerto Rico would receive a $1,500 annual salary increase. The charter schools program has been rejected by teachers' unions. Rosselló said in a tweet that every child should have the opportunity to access quality education and succeed. In Chile, there are a number of indigenous communities which, like the Mapuche, also struggle against the state for territorial sovereignty and rights. Here's a report on the Aymara people.
A bit inland from the city of Iquique, arid paths lead to the northern grasslands, home to Aymara communities and other indigenous people fighting to maintain their ancestral lands and customs. Today, they are threatened by business and modernity.
There are spaces that are fundamental to us, which are the Alcapacha, Acapacha, and Mancapacha, which exist both above ground and in subterranean spaces underground. We protect these spaces and ensure no damage is caused.
These spaces have been affected by the arrival of transnational companies, which conduct studies and move in to exploit the land, without consulting the indigenous people who live there.
The legislative regulations in Chile are very weak and are almost all in favor of the big companies, and the government fails to support the indigenous people.
A state contradicts itself. It talks about the need to defend indigenous people, but in practice it allows the right to be ignored.
These are ongoing historical issues with the state. Historic problems including territorial issues and those regarding mining and the environment.
On January 5th, Aymara communities were granted protection by a local court after they asked for the annulment of the indigenous constituent process pushed by the government of Michelle Bachelet.
El Estado simplemente quiso imponer.
The state simply wanted to be on the record as having held a dialogue with the indigenous peoples for the international press, but that's a lie.
Con los pueblos originarios, y eso es una mentira.
The lack of information in the communities was one of the main reasons why the state did not make the effort to visit the people, a process that ended without recognition of their land.
The state doesn't want to recognize us and our right to the land because the state wants to move onto our territories and hand out permits to the mining companies.
Para que las mineras primero hagan la parte de la exploración sin consulta previa.
Faced with a state that destroys their ancestral territories, many indigenous people feel the institutional mechanism for trying to address these issues are all but worthless. For them, the surest way to achieve justice is to keep on struggling to preserve their history.
We take a short break now. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting on. Welcome back. The U.S. stock market continues to fall today. The Dow plunged 1,175 points on Monday, the largest one-day point dive in its history. That pulled down markets across Asia and Europe. The German DAX hit its lowest level in 6 months. Japan's Nikkei fell about 4.7%, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng dropped 4.2%. Earlier, we spoke with Ashok Dasgupta, the former deputy editor of the Hindu newspaper, and he explained the market contagion.
You see, the problem that came about is the concern in the US, first about jobs, then about inflation going up, and all this together has created a sort of global scare. Now, you should also remember that now all economies are connected and it is like a global village, despite the attempts at protectionism. So what happens is when the Dow Jones collapses, the ripple effect is pretty strong in the Asian markets.
Live now to Washington and our correspondent Jorge Gestuso. Jorge, the Dow has been up and down this morning after yesterday's big fall. What's going on?
The key word, according to all the experts, is not to panic. Underline, not to panic. This is seen as a natural adjustment after many, many months of increased amounts of percentage of the Dow Jones going up and down is absolutely normal according to the experts. We're talking a 4% Dow downfall in the following days. We're talking about yesterday, and that is far from being any record. They insist that the adjustment is due to coming an increase in the interest rates, and that the foundations of the economy are very solid, and therefore there's no way to see anything else than an adjustment in the trend of the ups and downs that is normally in the stock market. So again, what they're saying is not to panic, it's just an adjustment. The economy was getting some inflation, and in order to correct the inflation was necessary that in the stock market we could see that sort of adjustment. That's what we hear in Washington and in New York.
Thank you so much for that update. We've been talking to our Washington correspondent, Jorge Gestuso. Cryptocurrencies are also taking it on the chin. Bitcoin continues its slide to below $6,000. The head of the Bank for International Settlements called Bitcoin a combination of a bubble, a Ponzi scheme, and an environmental disaster. Now let's have a look at some other stories from around the world.
South Africa has postponed its State of the Nation address amid a tense political showdown. The ruling party, the African National Congress, wants to unseat President Jacob Zuma over multiple corruption scandals, but Zuma refuses to quit.
We welcome the postponement of the State of the Nation address and look forward to a motion of no confidence, which will reiterate that it should be convened before any State of the Nation address, because predictably so, Mr. Zuma is not going to resign any moment soon.
Hours after the Maldives government declared a 15-day emergency, police arrested former President Maumoon Abdul Gayoom, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and another judge. The political crisis began when the Supreme Court ruled the trial of the former president was unconstitutional and ordered the release of political dissents. But the current president, Abdullah Yamin, has refused to accept the ruling. With just 4 days to go before the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in South Korea, the organizers say they are fully prepared to host the mega event. They also hope the event will bring peace between the two Koreas.
The Pyeongchang Olympic Games Organizing Committee has prepared and has made a lot of efforts from an early stage to hold these Peace Olympics with the participation of North Korea, and it has become a reality. Through the participation of North Korea, the Peace Olympics has been realized, and this will lead a foundation to improve inter-Korean relations.
SpaceX will launch its Falcon Heavy rocket today. The company, founded by US entrepreneur Elon Musk, hopes this will be the world's most powerful rocket in operation. Falcon Heavy will be launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, the same starting point for some of NASA's biggest achievements. The long-term goal for the rocket is to ferry people to the moon or Mars. But for today, Musk has decided to send a replica of his Tesla Roadster car into space.
If he was still alive, reggae icon Bob Marley would have celebrated his 73rd birthday. And in Jamaica, there's a full day of activities planned. Bob Marley is regarded as a cultural icon who implored the people of Jamaica to know their history. Marley advocated for social change while allowing for listeners to forget their troubles and dance through his music. Visitors to the Bob Marley Museum in Jamaica wished Bob Marley happy birthday. Let's take a listen.
Happy birthday, Bob.
Yeah, like Bob.
Happy birthday, Bob.
Happy birthday, Bob.
Happy birthday, Bob. Alles Gute zum Geburtstag. Alles Gute zum Geburtstag.
May your legacy live on in the spirit. Leaves fill it. Happy birthday, Bob. Bob, Bob.
Blessed Earth Strong, Bob.
Blessed Earth Strong, Bob.
Denmark's Tivoli Garden, the second largest amusement park in the world, is celebrating its 175th anniversary with a Winter Light Festival. The festival features a gigantic Greenland igloo, an icy forest with an octagonal ice rink with 200,000 lights. The display kicks off the Copenhagen Light Festival, which will run until March 2nd. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesiotv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesio English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.